65% of people will torture a stranger if you ask them nicely enough. Not psychopaths, not criminals, ordinary people. Teachers, accountants, your neighbors. Stanley Milgram proved this in 1961, and we've been trying to forget it ever since. The most terrifying part, you probably would too. Most people think evil requires monsters, that torture demands sadists, that genocide needs ideologues drunk on hatred. Milgram's obedience experiments shattered these comfortable delusions. He discovered something far more unsettling. Ordinary people become instruments of harm when authority figures provide the right psychological conditions. Here's what actually happened. Milgram recruited volunteers for what they believed was a learning experiment. Each participant played the role of teacher, while a Confederate played the learner in another room. The teacher's job was simple: ask questions, and when the learner got answers wrong, deliver electric shocks of increasing intensity. The shocks started at 15 volts and climbed to 450 volts, clearly marked as potentially lethal. The learner, of course, received no actual shocks, but the teachers didn't know this. As the voltage increased, they heard screams, pleas to stop, mentions of heart conditions, and eventually silence. When teachers hesitated, the experimenter used 4 simple prompts. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue, and you have no other choice, you must go on. No threats, no coercion, no weapons, just a man in a lab coat making polite requests. 65% went all the way to the maximum voltage. They believed they were delivering potentially fatal shocks to an innocent person, and they did it anyway because someone in authority told them it was necessary. Before the experiment, Milgram surveyed psychiatrists about the expected results. They predicted less than 1% would go to maximum voltage, and only pathological personalities would comply. They were catastrophically wrong. The participants weren't sadists. They were normal people caught in a web of psychological forces they didn't understand. The mechanism works through what researchers call agentic shift. In everyday life, people operate in an autonomous state. They feel responsible for their actions and their consequences. But in the presence of legitimate authority, they shift into an agentic state. They become agents of the authority figure and feel the authority bears responsibility for outcomes. This shift doesn't happen instantly. It requires specific conditions. First, the authority figure must appear legitimate, hence the Yale University setting and the experimenter's scientific credentials. Second, the harmful actions must be presented as serving a higher purpose, advancing scientific knowledge about learning. Third, the escalation must be gradual. Nobody starts by delivering maximum voltage. Each shock is only slightly higher than the last, making each step feel reasonable. Most importantly, the authority figure must accept responsibility. When participants expressed concern, the experimenter explicitly stated that he would take responsibility for any consequences. This removed the psychological burden that might otherwise trigger resistance. These mechanisms operate far beyond psychology laboratories. In 1968, William Calley ordered his troops to massacre civilians at My Lai. Ordinary soldiers became executioners. In 2001, Enron executives ordered accountants to fabricate numbers. Respected professionals became accomplices to fraud. In corporate environments worldwide, middle managers implement policies they privately consider unethical because the directive came from above. The pattern remains consistent. Legitimate authority figures present harmful actions as necessary for important goals, accept responsibility for consequences, and gradually escalate requests. Most people comply, even when compliance violates their core values. You want to believe you're different, that you'd recognize the manipulation and resist, that your moral convictions would override social pressure. This confidence stems from what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. You attribute others' compliance to their character flaws while ignoring the situational forces that would affect you identically. Milgram's variations prove how universal these forces are. When the experimenter left the room and gave instructions by phone, compliance dropped to 21%. When the learner was in the same room as the teacher, compliance fell to 40%. When the teacher had to physically place the learner's hand on a shock plate, compliance dropped to 30%. But even under these conditions, substantial numbers of people still complied. Modern replications confirm the effect persists. In 2009, Jerry Berger conducted a partial replication, stopping at 150 volts for ethical reasons. 70% of participants were willing to continue beyond that point, matching Milgram's original findings. The psychological machinery of obedience hasn't changed. Recognizing these forces offers limited protection, but protection nonetheless. First, understand that legitimate authority isn't the same as moral authority. A person can hold a position of power without deserving your compliance. Second, recognize gradual escalation. When requests become progressively more uncomfortable, step back and evaluate the full trajectory, not just the current request. Third, maintain personal responsibility. When authority figures offer to take responsibility for your actions, refuse. Your actions remain yours regardless of who gives the orders. Fourth, seek peer input. Milgram found that when teachers could observe others refusing to continue, compliance dropped dramatically. Social support enables resistance. Finally, prepare moral lines you won't cross before you encounter pressure to cross them. People who resist harmful authority have usually thought about resistance in advance. They've mentally rehearsed refusal. They've identified principles more important than compliance. The uncomfortable truth is that most people, including you, are one authority figure away from becoming someone they wouldn't recognize. The capacity for blind obedience isn't a character flaw. It's a feature of human psychology that served our species well when survival depended on tribal hierarchy. But in modern contexts, this same psychology transforms ordinary people into instruments of systematic harm. Milgram's legacy isn't just about psychology, it's about recognizing the situational forces that shape moral behavior. Evil rarely announces itself with horns and pitchforks. Usually, it wears a lab coat and asks politely. The question isn't whether you're capable of blind obedience. Milgram already answered that. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge?